In this video, we are going to discuss the development of the feeding, but of course we're not going to just limit ourselves to feeding as the kind of utilitarian task of just bringing the food into the mouth, but we will look at the way how we can sort of leverage and amplify the feeding process itself into the development of lots of the related aspects. So how to develop the mimic musculature, how to get the better control of the lips, how to facilitate their general development of the sophistication of movements, which surprisingly would sort of spread from just the control of the mouth towards the entire sort of strategies of control for the entire body. So let's start, and then we will get further with these explanations. Now, in this case, we are discussing the situation, so which has been generously granted the permission from this family. So, of the child who is 3.5 years old and in sort of mild to moderate condition in that respect. And the lessons that we can get from here, they spread, right? Because that's the same thing. A lot of parents, they tend to just focus on their diagnostic label. If the child is severe, or I only want to learn from the cases of severe children. If my child is diagnosed with, say, cerebral palsy, well, then the lessons from the children with genetic disorders or with autism are not applicable, and the opposite, right? So if this is the child who is the child with cerebral palsy, then I'm not going to learn anything if my child has autism. So that is obviously a very misguided approach, because effectively in all of these scenarios we are dealing with one big question: how can we get that sort of sweet spot where we combine the two? So the child's natural enthusiasm for doing something, and at the same time doing it in such a way that it comes with quality. So what is the maximum quality? Because so many things which are done by the children, whether it's in mild, moderate, and of course the severe conditions as well, that the tendencies of the delivery of those movements, they unfortunately bring the additional problems in the long run, meaning that the way how the child solves the problems, the solutions to those problems become the base for the next level of problems. So, and we want to find those sweet spots, those relatively narrow windows where that spontaneous activity has the quality which is sort of a plus, right? So if we think about it, so it's 50% plus 1, right? So it's more. And then based on this quality, we can build the development so the spontaneous activity would be positive. And this is a very good example here, because as you can see, she is able to use the fork, right? You can see she's able to use the fork quite well, quite precisely, brings it into the mouth, feeding herself and so on. So that's lovely, right? And if you think about it in the usual way, you would say, oh wow, that's great, and let's practice this feeding more, because like she's already showing quite advanced stages. And definitely as a parent or as a therapist, you wouldn't think of going back to less sophisticated activities such as feeding by hand, sort of using the food which would not be in chunks, but the ones which would be more mashed, and you wouldn't be thinking about kind of using the softish food and so on. So that's a typical perspective. But what I want to show here is that yes, this is a good movement, and the particularly good thing about this movement is this final touch, right? So how she closes the head, and you can see when she closes the head, she brings the head into the forwards flexion. That's super important, that her head goes into this forwards flexion. That's excellent, because this is really the true illustration of the head control, and the one that comes from the neck, not from the arms. And that is the situation where you can kind of train two aspects at the same time, the development of the mouth and the development at the same time. So this synchronization is very important. However, if we continue to observe her ways of using objects like forks, spoons, and so on. So what do we see here? So here she is trying to use the spoon. And we can see that the use of the spoon is not so effective. She's missing the plate and so on. And then eventually when she succeeds, she puts it in the mouth and then does this turn. So what would be the most logical approach in this scenario? So the logical approach for anyone who is based on the idea of training would be to say, oh, you know what? She is doing well with the fork, so we have to keep building the fork thing, and now she has to practice the eating with the spoon. So we have to help her, maybe by holding the hand, and then as she's allowed to practice this thing more, then she would get better in getting herself precisely into the bowl, and then as she goes further, that would improve. And there would also be an additional message trying to consider the mobility of the arm, and one would say, well, maybe she needs to get some stretching, maybe she needs to get some positioning of the arm so that she gets the rotation easier, and so on. So that would be the typical logic, and maybe using the adapted spoon. So that's where the conversation would go. So my point is very, very different here. So once again, what I'm looking here at, I'm looking at the development of the quality. So everything that the child does, we should not be looking at this from this utilitarian or social perspective, right? Is it socially valuable, or how nicely it looks from the social perspective, or how much of the utilitarian value of self-feeding herself we are going to get from it. No, our main point is to look at the maximum contribution towards the child's development. So, and that means we want the activities where she would have the greatest diversity of the repertoire, where she would have the greatest diversity of the greatest diversity and distribution of the loads, where she would have the minimal muscular effort, and where she would need to show the maximum creativity in terms of the control of this from the brain. So now, with these ideas in mind, let's look at the comparison between this feeding with the spoon and feeding by hand. Oops. Let's watch this sequence. So here she is getting the hand on the plate, right? So picking things up, bringing them up, turning, bringing into the mouth. You see the position of the hand, then it's the closure of the hand, then it's the experience of getting additional touch in the mouth, then practicing the additional push and the release of the food, then facilitating it, then bringing the second hand in, then closing, and so on, and then finally getting it through and starting to do the chewing. So my main point is that this activity that we are observing is of much higher quality and serves much greater developmental purpose than this one when she performs well with the fork, and even more so than this one when she is not succeeding in her use of the spoon. So my point would be that we have to look at the key elements, right? So at first, I already said, the distribution. So what do we see here? In this scenario, we're seeing a lot more sophisticated engagement of the fingers. So she is doing the fingers interplay. And she has to learn to do a very exact, precise grip, but the texture of the chunks is forgiving in the scenario that she doesn't do a very precise job. So even if it's not precise enough, as long as she feels empowered and she kind of shows the enthusiasm for this, this is good. The second thing that I want you to pay attention to, you see in this situation, right from the start, she keeps the head in flexion. So we already know that this is good from the neck perspective. And then what is another important thing, we also see that the eyes are looking downwards. So that's another very important thing, because this is one of the key aspects for the majority of the kids. They have troubles looking downwards. They can tilt the eyes, they can tilt the head and look straight or look upwards, but looking downwards and getting the control, that's the very important additional shift. And the third aspect that we would get here would be how the component of ease, how easily she does it, right? So in that respect, on what kind of the muscular effort she runs it. So the less muscular effort, the better. I remind this basic thing that everything that we do as healthy people runs on 5% of the muscle usage. So our typical activity, we use 5% of the muscle effort for delivering the 100% of action. So we have this 20 times kind of benefit ratio. And that's really the key for us when we talk about the channel. We want to be as close to this 5%. We are not really looking at how high and what kind of percentage of the full functional or full utilitarian function the child is able to deliver at this percentage. For us, the key point is minimizing the percentage of effort, and by 100% we take their current capacity as long as the child is able to do it, and able to do it with enthusiasm, and able to do their cycles. So that's the cycles, means the repeat things, going back and forth, repeat, return, and so on. So the cycles are extremely important. So once we understand this, let's have another look at the action. See, that's the grip. She maintains the control, she maintains the look, and then she brings it into the mouth. See, when she gets into the mouth, now there's a lot of fine aspects, fine controls are taking place. So you see, she's bringing it to the mouth in a very precise manner. She has to establish the connection between the sensory information that comes from the hand and the sensory information that comes from the lips. So she has to meet and coordinate those. So how far, how deep, how does it taste, how well does it sit into the mouth, how long is it going to take, or what kind of moves it's going to take to bring it in, so to prevent it from falling, and so on and so forth. So in that sense, the hand is way more sophisticated than the spoon. So for us, in this scenario, we should not be looking at the age and saying, oh, you know, it's a 3.5-year-old child, so this is what she's supposed to do. This is absolutely useless consideration. It doesn't tell us anything about this specific child and her relationship between the effort and the outcome. So The second thing that we shouldn't be looking at, we shouldn't be creating too much of difficulties, right? So the productive thing is something that could be seen even not 50% plus, but more like an 80-20 principle, but the 80 is in the good way, so the 80% is the confident base. And then you have this vicinity of the 20% for trying and refining it. So that's the way that the function improves best. When there is a positive reinforcement, when there is a spontaneous self-exploration of the child, not when it's kind of being difficult and being trained from the outside. So, and of course, as we look further, you see then she not just holds the food, that she opens the hand, pushes with the palm. So this transition from fingers to the palm is also extremely important, because it's a complete difference of the arm muscles and the torso muscles which are being recruited for this effort. So this is highly sophisticated. And one thing that I really want to say here, you see, one might say, you know what, here she was so clean, so accurate in getting the food in, so isn't it great? And here in this one she's kind of messy. So my point, it's better to be messy, because messy, that creates certain sort of surrounding level of mistakes, and those mistakes are necessary for learning. So another point, don't interfere. If the child is engaged, if the child is practicing herself, don't interfere. You know, like, and you can see in this situation, she doesn't even need positive reinforcement in terms of the, you know, oh, bravo, great, and so on. You know, she's already engaged. When she's engaged, you are not needed. You could be just present, don't disturb her, because in this situation, you see, she's really, really focused on her internal sensations. She's able to explore. She's exploring the taste, exploring the texture, and so on. And it's a kind of, it's a self-reward, right? So that's an extremely important thing to allow the child to develop, the self-reward. And in that sense, the success and the taste itself and the exploration, experimentation, that's a strong enough self-reward. And by adding additional kind of clap and all sorts of the accentuation, oh wow, how well have you done it, and so on, that's not necessary. Actually, this is detrimental, because it's going to switch her to a different modality of the central nervous system recruitment. So her tone will go up, whilst we want the tone to be down. So that's really the key to this observation of the high quality performance. And you might say, okay, but my child cannot do that. No, my child doesn't have such a sophisticated thing. It doesn't matter. So this is the example here, which is showing two things. One thing is that the importance of the usage of her own hands and building this link between the distances to the food and then the connection back. But on the other hand, it's this entire experimentation with the mouth. So when you are feeding the child, you can also do this, right? Because usually the feeding goes this way, right? So in that respect, with this girl, you can see that she's really engaged, so which is great. You know, look, this is a great tracking of the food and great emotional engagement. You can see here, look, she's really expecting the food, and that is also very important, because that immediately sets up, you know, the juices flowing in the stomach. So she's getting ready for digestion, the salivation is coming in. So in that respect, the physiology of digestion is kind of kicking into place. But then if we look at the way how the things go further, you see, look at that. This is really enthusiastic engagement here. Look, the smile, anticipation, and then the spoon comes, right? But you see, look, everyone does the same mistake. Everyone, all the parents, because you don't want things to be messy. What are you doing? You are lifting the spoon. You are lifting the spoon, and by lifting the spoon, you achieve the goal of kind of getting the more food off the spoon easily, right? Because if the spoon is flat, it's one thing. If you tilt the spoon, then the food kind of gravitationally just goes over, so it's less messy. But what's happening when you do this, you see, the child typically has to tilt and lift the head and move the jaw forwards. That's not a very good thing, because this way it goes against the control of the head. And you know, when it comes to the control of the head, this is the key point. We want the neck. We want the neck. We don't want the usage of the arms. We don't want the usage of the muscles attached to the hyoid bone. We want head flexion forward. So that's why when the head is flexed forwards, see, the mouth is not horizontal. It's slightly facing down. So as it's slightly facing down, you might say, oh, you know, food is going to fall out. It's not going to be so convenient for me to feed it. Well, my point in that respect, this is a trouble with the spoon. So if you do the spoon, bring it lower, so that the child would have the intention to bring the head forwards. And in that respect, it's related to these connections, right? So you see, these are the connections to the hyoid bone. And when the head is tilted and the jaw is moved forwards when you open the mouth, so inevitably you tighten this muscle, it goes up all the way to the base. So, and if this happens, then we're experiencing the weak reaction of the neck. So my point is to help you to understand that every single activity is training. It's in that sense contributes towards future development. And what you want to see there is that if this is the basket of troubles on one side, what you want to build the basket of positives on the other side. So the interactions in such a way that they will be adding to the right balance, the right distribution, and so on. So this is exactly the point of what we don't want to do. So, and you see, once again, when we saw her doing it with her hand, see, then she's experimenting a lot more with the head inflection, and even if the things fall out, she's able to catch. You see, she's able to then switch from the mouth to the eyes, so experiment and explore what's happening with the food. So all those are self-explorations which are extremely important, and they are sensory motivated from the body level. So that's, you know, extremely beneficial, extremely important, and the most important thing that is going to bring you the benefits well beyond, way beyond the mouth and the face. Why is that? Because we have to remember, the brain does not practice, does not control the internal part. The brain doesn't control muscles. The brain controls the tasks and activities in the external space. So the brain controls that aspect. So that's why it's particularly important for us to see those cycles. The brain delivers the action, then does the evaluation via dealing with perception. So the brain is the one which is linked to those loops. Action, perception, perception, action, correction, inference of the next steps, and so on and so forth. So that's why this skill is universal for the entire brain. So in other words, if the brain has established some connections and understandings and some patterns of internal network interaction, how to judge the distance, how to accelerate and slow down, how to stop, return, and then go back again, how to switch from one side to another, how to deal with the two types of the sensitivities, or for example, the finger sensitivity and the mouth sensitivity, or maybe even three types of the sensitivity: the fingers, the mouth, and the eyes, and then also the kinesthetic of the neck, the fourth type of the sensitivity. So these are the universal things that the child practices, and which are applicable not only for the face and the mouth, and not only for the hands. That's applicable to the entire body, all the way to the legs and so on. So in that respect, by building this connection when she is eating, you are contributing to the development of the brain capacity for the controls all through the body. So this is how you get these benefits. And this happens, as I said, in this comfortable exploration. So when the level of sort of surprises and the unknowns for the brain is kept low enough, say like arbitrary 20%. So that means that the brain itself is happy. So that's 20%. So the brain is happy with the 80%, and then it just keeps doing the next level of the refinement and the adjustment. So because when the brain is happy, what's happening? Exactly, the muscle tone goes down, so there is no super effort, and we can be moving to our number, of the 5% effort for the 100% action. So this ratio, getting towards this 20 times the amplification is the most important thing that we are looking for. So this is the part about feeding, and as I said, if your child cannot feed themselves, so might be we can put the hand in the mouth. So that's already an exploration, no matter how primitive it looks. Maybe you can put some whatever juice, some taste or whatever over their fingers, so that to add additional excitement to this, right? And in that respect, if we go back, this way, when she feeds herself with the mouth, and then when she puts the hands into the mouth, overall feeding by hand is way more productive than feeding by the spoon. So that's the lesson for you. So you can give your child the thing to suck off your finger. So even if it's going to take much longer, it's going to be much more practical and much more experiential. It's also going to allow you, because if you do this feeding, you would start feeling, imagine that was your hand. So you would start feeling what's happening on the receiving end, how well, how confidently, or how weakly she is doing the grab, so you would be able to track the development there. And you see, if we talk about the other objects, for example here, you see, she is practicing with the toothbrush, right? So this is great, because she doesn't need to feed herself. You can see a lot of these activities here, a lot of controls, a lot of the variations. So she is really on the exploration case. So it's, it doesn't mean that you should not be using any objects, right? But here, because you don't put this utilitarian value of feeding, or if you were trying to put here the utilitarian value of brushing the teeth, that would be wrong. So that has to be the self-play, self-exploration, which is really the best way for the self-development. So that's probably what I wanted to say for the lessons related to feeding. And as I said, these lessons are universal. The lesson about allowing the child to, or for you looking into that sweet spot where she has the lowest muscle tone, where she has the best confidence, the best enthusiasm to try herself, at the same time building the self rewards, right? So that's the important thing, extremely important thing, to build the self reward rather than you being the source of those celebrations and so on. And of course, a very big thing is to maximize the interaction between the sensory modalities, the mouth, the lips, the mouth, the tongue, the taste, the smell, and at the same time looking with the eyes, judging the distance, getting the kinesthetic feel of the approximation of the arm, getting the tactile feel from the fingers, and so on. So that's, once I start enumerating, you understand how many components are being addressed at the same time throughout this activity. So, and the final word here, these lessons are universal, whether it's a CP, or whether it's genetic conditions, or whether it's the autism or any other type of the so-called developmental delay, right? And the other aspect is that whether it's severe, or whether it's moderate, or whether it's mild, it's applicable to all scenarios. But in this case, just illustrating it with the activities of the, say, moderate to mild child, that really allows you to see very, very vividly the hidden aspects which are manifesting themselves probably even clearer than in a healthy child. So that's the end of the part related to the feeding, and we have also several more examples where we are using the generous help of this girl and her family to illustrate the development of the integration of the hands activities in sitting, and also the kind of the development of the sitting on the floor and the hidden activities which are related to this. So thank you very much, and I hope that this is helpful. So you can obviously get more of the specific ABR perspectives when you are looking at our online program participation.